Okay, folks, now the moment you've all been waiting for. Before, we've only focused on disclosure, what's been available to us, and how to take advantage of that and put together this amazing puzzle piece of protocols and ports and access and theory, etc., etc., etc. Now's the point where we actually get to change the integrity of our systems. This is what we refer to as the classic hack. So let's take a look at it. Remember, ourselves to our target. Ultimately, we want to gain access to our systems. So there's different ways in which all of this you have to master, but there's different ways in which you can break this down increment by increment and look at. First, gaining access to the system. The easiest way, of course, is going to be a username and password. So how do we get those? One way, eavesdropping. It's just as simple as that. If you could either look over somebody's shoulder and get their password, or it's written down somewhere, or nonetheless, you have that password, that's the holy grail, okay? If you don't have it, then we have to get it some way, and we have to use our creative social skills to actually do that. This is where your traditional brute force attack, or exhausting all possible combinations of the password, that's where that comes in. Or dictionary. This is where you take a password file and you reference it and compare it against a file of stuff. And in that file could be literally anything. Then defaults. You could just Google default usernames and passwords. If that gets you access, great. Low-hanging fruit. Or the hybrid technique, which is traditionally brute force and dictionary. At a minimum, you must master these ways of gaining access to a system. Once you gain access to that system, then, okay, let's get more privileges. All right? So this is where exploits come in, or additional password cracking techniques, because you might have access as a guest, but now you want to go after the administrator or some other higher privileged account. So there's two ways in which we can summarize doing that. Horizontal privilege escalation and vertical privilege escalation. Horizontal, going from group A to group B, versus vertical, going from guest to administrator. Okay? Once we gain access and can get some privileges, even if they're low level, this is where we ultimately want to start having our applications or malicious software executed on that system. So executing application. This is where the whole world of Trojans and spyware and viruses and worms come into play. It's its own separate module, so we'll see that a little bit later on, but I will give you the basics of how the tools works. Keyloggers, whether hardware or software. This is some really fun stuff, because if you can just put a hardware or a software-based keyboard logger on a system, you can capture everything that person types. Even better to be able to do that remotely. All right? We need to do this so that ultimately we can put our own backdoor, execute the application for our own backdoor on that system, so that way we can have our way with it whenever we want. All right? Next, once we get our applications to execute, we got to be able to hide some stuff, right? This is where rootkits come in play, because ultimately rootkit gives you backdoor access to the system, and you don't want to advertise, hey, I've got access to your system. All right? It doesn't work like that. You have to be very, very covert and hidden in that sense. This is also where alternative data streams come in. This is such an easy technique to do, but very few people know how to do it. This is something you should be able to do on the fly. Boom, alternative data stream, done. That simple. Stenography. Notice I have some stars next to keyloggers and stenography. These are separate areas of expertise. Literally, that's its own Pandora's box, right? So keyloggers goes into all different types, and we're going to spend some additional time on that later. Stenography is another one of those subjects. This is basically where we're hiding information in sort of different media. Could be files, folders, audio, video, applications, EIEIO. We'll get into all of that later, but nonetheless, this is an area in which you want to master. And then ultimately, not only hiding your stuff, but basically being able to make it look like you weren't there. All right? So this is where we have to do log file analysis, and you, the attacker, have to be a better log file analyzer than the system administrator trying to track you down. All right? Now, you do have some things working for you as a penetration tester. I love it when system administrators go to check the log files, because most of them, with all due respect, have no idea what they're looking for. They open up the log files and they go, Yep, nothing to see here. They wouldn't know what was in front of them if you put it in front of them. All right? Not to really attack the system administrators, because we've all come from that world in some way, shape, or form. Very, very important. But log file analysis is just a lost art. Okay? And so the penetration tester has to know way more about log file analysis, has to be an expert in log file analysis, more so than the person looking in the log files. So compared to offense versus defense, the penetration tester must absolutely master log file manipulation, or else go to jail. Okay, in the black hat world, in the the ethical white hat legitimate world, basically alarm sounds, you get caught. So if you're doing some sort of analysis and you're not, people aren't supposed to know that you're breaking into the network, you just now ring the alarm bells and game's over for you. Now you have to come out and say, yes, here's my paperwork, and you have to go explain your life away, and your test is over. All right, so covering tracks, extremely critical. This is, you're getting caught versus you're not getting caught, or going to jail versus not going to jail, depending on if you're white hat or black hat in that world. Okay, so this is everything you need to pay attention to with our target. When it comes to Microsoft specific systems, you need to know everything about authentication, realistically. All right? This is where the penetration tester has to supersede that of the network administrator once again, because you have typical Unix administrators or Microsoft administrators. Well, the penetration tester, they have to be a master at all of it. But specifically related to Microsoft, you must know how to access the Security Account Manager database on every type of system. You need to know everything about NTLM, all of the versions, what type of protection mechanisms they use, the old LAN manager systems versus NTLM version 1, version 2, because if you can find one system that has an old LAN manager capability, easy exploit, right? Or Kerberos. How do you manipulate the Kerberos process? Now, let's go and zoom out here to password specific stuff. You must be a master of passwords. I said that the easiest way to get access to a system was to have a password, right? So let's talk about everything that there is to know about passwords. First one, and these are the areas you really want to study here. Passive online, all right? So the difference between active and passive is, active is you reach out and touch your target, and your target knows and feels that. Passively, they don't know that you're doing it. So there's basically three major techniques in the passive category. Wire sniffing, if you can just listen to the network, and you can get a username and password, and because the penetration tester, they must be an expert, again, at log file analysis and sniffing traffic. If you can just find that username and password combination, dinner bell rings. Man-in-the-middle attacks. If you can insert yourself into the middle of a conversation, well, then everything gets disclosed to you, including the username and password, or perhaps the hash, or whatever goes back and forth. So this is another area to study. Another piece is replay attacks. This is where somebody sends authentication to a server, you get to capture that and then replay it at a later time. So why should I try to crack the password if I can just capture it and replay it? If the destination system says, okay, yep, that's what I wanted to know, let me in, okay, great, easy for us. Passwords, active online. So now we're reaching out and we're touching our targets. This is where attacks, especially in the wireless world, you do techniques like hash injection, or you can use Trojans or spyware, or simply start guessing. All right, there's certain science to actually just trying to guess a password, or using some sort of software like the social engineering toolkit within inside the Kali operating system and setting up a phishing attack. All right, offline attacks. This is where we focus on hashing or distributed computer systems. In other words, multiple systems all working to crack a piece of the password space, if you will. Or rainbow tables. One of my favorite websites is Free Rainbow Tables. I think it's .org if I'm not mistaken. Either way, if you Google Free Rainbow Tables, this is easy enough. Because literally there are gigabytes and terabytes of just rainbow tables of stuff that has been hashed. So we're going to take apart the rainbow table process. You must master that. And then the non-electronic means would be things like shoulder surfing, social engineering, and of course digging through the trash. So that's the four major areas of getting a password. passive online, active online, offline, and then non-electronic. Let's go over to one other area here. Rootkits. There's several different types of rootkits in which the penetration tester must master and be able to do all of this hands-on. Now, I want you guys to pay really, really close attention. None of this is worth a dime if you can't do the hands-on. You can talk about this stuff in theory all day long, but you'll never get a job, you'll never be a penetration tester, you'll never have a career unless you can do all of this in a hands-on format. Right? So the difference that's going to separate you guys from everybody else out there that doesn't know what they're doing is you're going to be able to do this in a hands-on format. So rootkits, being able to create a firmware rootkit or a hypervisor rootkit for virtual machine software, or inserting a kernel level rootkit into like the operating system of Microsoft or Linux or something like that. Application layer rootkits, library rootkits for application programming languages, or even bootloader rootkits. Right? So the whole subject matter of system hacking could take years and years and years to master, and we can have that time if we need it. But let's look at the common countermeasures that are put in place, and then we'll wrap this up. Salting. This is a particular technique. It really should be a lot more popular than what it is, but most systems do not use salting. For why, I have no idea, because it's such an easy technique and it defeats a lot of the rainbow table style attacks. So we got to know what salting is and when to use it or when to look for it. Also, your run-of-the-mill anti-rootkit or anti-spyware type programs. That's a great countermeasure to defeat this type of attack. One of my favorite, albeit training, making sure everybody knows what the heck they're doing. Whether it's training employees, training system administrators, training penetration testers, training. The problem with training is that most of the time there's a problem, and so we fix that by sending someone to training. That's not the way training is supposed to work. Training, my point being, why not train them to know how to do it securely the first time so that there is no incident in which you have to detectively and reactively send someone to training. So preventatively versus detectively and reactively. I always suggest that training should be done proactively, and therefore you can address the knowledge gap and things like that. Also, hardening your systems. If you look at the target in terms of a surface area here, zoom back into the target for a second here, right? If we could take away all, from a defensive point of view, if we could start taking away all of the penetration testers' options, in other words, we don't give the penetration tester the ability to eavesdrop, we don't give them the ability to brute force or go after passwords, we monitor accounts, remember this is all defensive, we monitor accounts to see if someone's trying to crack passwords or do privilege escalation, or we monitor software on hard drives and operating systems to make sure that Trojan spyware and keyloggers aren't installed. If we constantly are looking for hidden stuff to detect it and correct it so that way alternative data streams aren't left on the systems or people aren't using stenography, or we're constantly doing log file analysis. If we defensively take these options away, well then the penetration tester has nothing. This is literally from a pen testing point of view where if I don't have any options here, I start scratching my head and going, we're going to have to get really, really creative because the surface area of the attack is slim to none at this point. I don't have any options here, which means that that target system is secure. But the more I have here to work with, the more I can go after that system. Literally, there's hundreds of hours worth of attacks and techniques that it can be applied just having that. So defensively, if you can take that away, well then the penetration tester can't do anything. All right. So harden your systems, takes these options away from a defensive point of view, and this is where things like STIGs or Standard Technical Implementation Guidelines come in, and mastering those, because these are all of the best practices for hardening our systems. And there's plenty of ways in which you can go after STIGs, and that's really its own conversation. And the last piece is common sense. It used to be called common sense, but it's not so common anymore, right? From a pen tester's point of view, I laugh a lot of the times. I'm like, well, they just left, a trail of cookie crumbs for me there. I'm just going to follow that trail and see how far the rabbit hole goes. Well, That's because the network administrators or the defensive people realistically aren't applying common sense. Or even if they wanted to apply common sense, they're getting lost in the processes, the procedures, and the technology, and they can't stop me for whatever reason. So if you can't stop me, well, then I'm going to exploit your systems, I'm going to write a report, and I'm going to show you. And I'm going to say, look, here it is. Here's the attack. Nothing is more valuable than getting access to a CEO's inbox and putting your resume on their desktop. That is your bread and butter. Case in point, yes, I hacked your system. Okay? You want to send the message? That's a great way to do it. But if I can't do that, well then, what does that say about your defensive techniques? Well, they have to be pretty good in that case, right? So, apply common sense. Let's not get lost in the policies, the standards, the procedures, and the guidelines, and get lost in the run-of-the-mill way in which IT is done, meaning the patch management process, the change control process. If all of those were robust and efficient, well then that makes my job as a penetration tester that much harder. Okay? So, quick summary. We're at the first point where we can change the integrity of our targets. We're not only using disclosure, like what a password is, but we're also exploiting the system in terms of integrity. There are plenty of things that we can go after on our target: gaining access, escalating privileges, executing applications, hiding stuff, and covering our tracks. Since most systems out there tend to be Microsoft, the biggest bang for your buck is to learn Microsoft systems first. Know everything that there is to know about the different password techniques, learn how to use rootkits to your advantage, and learn the common countermeasures that are put in place, because if the pen tester knows what countermeasures that are going to be put in place, well then the pen tester can sidestep and move around it. So let's go ahead and see what this looks like from a hands-on point of view.